rhetorical devices to enhance and emphasize ideas, eliminate jargon and unnecessary words, and then to also use correct grammar. The time for speech is 5 to 7 minutes. Please welcome to give her speech, Pomp and Circumstance, Jennifer Nelson.
What was the title, sorry?
Pomp and Circumstance.
Oh, Pomp. How do you spell that? P.
You want to P?
Pomp and Circumstance.
C-I.
Yeah, I've got that.
F.
Circumstance. Okay.
Master of the Toast, fellow Toastmasters, I'm Jennifer Nelson. And you asked what it's like to work in a funeral home. I'm a person who can tell you because I worked in a funeral home for over 12 years. And I'd say that the experience was very bittersweet. But the thing that I loved the most about funerals was the pomp and circumstance of the funeral ceremony itself, the traditional funeral ceremony. One of the churches that I enjoyed working in the most was a Catholic church that had a priest who took after my own heart. He loved ceremony, he loved the pageantry, and he loved tradition. So the services in his church were perfectly choreographed and went off smoothly and elegantly. I really enjoyed working there with him. I was at the church once with a fellow funeral director, and the beginning of the service and the body of the service had gone on as suitably as could possibly be. And we had reached the point where we were nearing the conclusion of the service. So my colleague and I took up our places at the ends of the aisle. The next step was we were going to proceed down the aisle to the front of the church. So on cue, which was the second verse of the concluding hymn, we began our walk down our separate aisles of the church. And we reached the front of the church and stop as is prescribed. The priest and the 3 altar boys and ourselves all turn, and in perfect unison, we genuflect elegantly in the appropriate direction. Then the colleague and myself walk towards the casket in the center in front of the altar, and I take up my position at the foot end. Now, something you may not know is that funeral directors are constantly observing traditions of funerals, age-old traditions, and most of the public aren't even aware of these. One of them is that the casket is always moved foot first, and the reason for this is so that the deceased will be facing the afterlife to come. You would never move the casket head first, lest the deceased be seeing the mourning family and the things he or she will be left behind, and then be trapped on the earthly plane. So it's one of our obligations as funeral directors to ensure that our clients don't turn into ghosts. And we're quite successful at it as far as I understand. We've never had a complaint yet. So I take up my position at the foot of the casket, and we move the casket now so that it's drawing across on the floor of the church. And in this movement, as we draw back, it allows the priest and the altar boys to glide past us in a sweep of robes and incense smoke. We then instruct the pallbearers to move out into the aisle and instruct the family to follow the casket. And this way, we will create a beautiful and elegant procession out of the church. And so I'm leading at the foot of the casket, and we're walking slowly up the aisle, and I can see Father's bald head is sort of shuffling back and forth at the top of the parade. The pallbearers are in a perfect alignment with each other, 2 abreast, and I'm in step with the pallbearers. And I notice in the congregation, there's a gentleman who's filming the entire procession. And with that instant knowledge that you sometimes achieve, I understand that the man we are escorting is from an Eastern European country. And this video will be going to the old country so that his relatives will see this elegant display that we've put on to usher their loved one to his final resting place. So at this moment, I begin to just swell with pride that I am part of this whole ceremony. And the organ music is swelling up to the rafters of the church. And right at that instant, something grabs my shoe, and I'm left with one bare foot. So what the culprit was the wheel on the cart that the casket's rolling upon. And I think maybe the other funeral director can kick it up the aisle to me. So I turned back to look at her, just to see that the wheels at her end of the casket had gone bunk bunk over top of my shoe. She looks down and looks up at me in shock. And now I understand, to my great humiliation, the family is probably tripping and trotting all over my shoe in the aisle, but I'm being pushed along in the procession. Now, the old dogs of funeral service tell the young pups when we first start that if anything goes wrong in the funeral service, act like this is the way it always happens because the public doesn't know the difference. So I'm trying to convince myself that everyone is going to believe the lead funeral director always kicks off her shoe and walks out with one bare foot from the church. We reach the foyer of the church, and I whisper to my colleague, "You go alone." And what I mean by that is, dear Margaret, as you know, the next part of this procession is we will be exiting the church with the casket, the pallbearers, the father of the family, and the mourners. We'll be going down the cement stairs of the church, along the church sidewalk, across the grass median, and onto the gravel at the side of the road where the funeral coach, or hearse as you probably know it, is waiting for us. And I really don't want to do this in one bare foot. So would you be kindly enough to continue on without me? And Margaret's response was, "Yeah." And what she meant by that was, "Yeah." So she takes the original funeral service rule and acts as though this is the way we always exit the church, with one funeral director, and she carries on with the service. I, in the meantime, slip around to the side door of the church and enter the sanctuary, and now I'm frantically looking for my shoe. But there's still people exiting the church, so I'm trying not to look like I'm frantically looking for my shoe, and I'm also trying not to look like I'm missing a shoe. And this is a very awkward thing to do, and I'm not achieving it very well. But at some point, while I'm looking around and thinking, oh, maybe my shoes managed to have been kicked all the way up by the mourners and now it's back in the foyer of the church, I notice a little old lady, and she's waving me down. So I limp over to her, and from out of her purse, she draws my shoe, and she presents it to me like Cinderella. And she says, "I'm sure nobody saw, dear. I picked it up right away." And when I thought that, I do recall distinctly hearing someone gasp, "Her shoe!" at the moment my predicament began. And in fact, the man with the camcorder actually zoomed in on what was happening. But here was an angel offering me some hope. And I said to her, "Really?" And bless her, that brave woman stood in her church and lied right before her God and said, "No, dear, nobody saw."